It's working. Okay, great. Okay, so we're starting in about 3 minutes and a half. And the YouTube link, it's a little behind, so that's why you see like probably more time left over there. Yeah. They can also hear what we're saying, I'm pretty sure. Just FYI. Hi, Gabs. I can see your comments. I don't know if you can hear me just yet, but cool. All right, 2 minutes left to go. Remember that I'm going to need your cameras on, guys. One minute. So just so you guys are prepared, the first topic is, can Christians be pro-choice? Can Christians be pro-choice? Hi, Stephen. Yes, this is YouTube, not the Google Meet. Thank you for the information. All right, 30 seconds. Oh, Stephen, I'm sorry. I was talking to the team, not to you guys, for cameras. My bad. right, we are live, guys. Hello, everybody. We had some technical difficulties there, but we were able to get on live. So thank you for being here today. What's everyone doing?
Good.
Good, good.
Oh, thanks. That intro was a hot mess at first. Thanks to Reynold, it looks a lot better now. All right.
Thank you, Reynaldo.
Yes, thank you, Reynold.
I'm here for the team.
All right, guys, so let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to go right ahead and get into our topics because we got some really great topics I want to actually talk about. So you guys kind of voted on which ones, like we gave you options basically, but you guys pretty much decided what we're going to be talking about today. So the first topic for today is, the first winner was, can Christians be pro-choice? Big question. Oh, that light is not good for the camera, but ignore the light.
Um,
Yeah,
First, pro-choice is like a woman could choose what to do with their body, right?
yeah,
Okay.
they can choose abortion basically, which by
Okay.
the way is a good point because pro-choicers really only care when the woman chooses abortion. It doesn't really seem to matter to them if they choose life. They have a problem with women choose life, but they're totally encouraging just the abortion part of it.
So that's contradiction themselves.
I mean, it kind of seems. I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think? It seems that way to me. Um, they're saying it.
Well,
Yeah, a woman can choose, but it seems like they just want women to have abortions.
I think pro-choice is more like the choice. They focus more on the choice of being able to abort,
Yeah.
not to survive otherwise.
Right. Right.
Doesn't matter.
So the question is, can Christians be pro-choice? What do you guys think?
Um, I think a new Christian might be pro-choice because of ignorance, because they don't know enough, maybe. Like, there's sometimes where a new Christian is starting to learn the ropes and the differences in morale and different situations in the world. Like, a lot of Christians think that Black Lives Matter is okay because of the fact of ignorance. They don't know what it stands for. They don't understand what the Bible actually says about it. Now, someone who's been a Christian and has, I guess, studied the issue, no, they can't be pro-choice because it's almost like saying they're in favor of allowing people to kill, which is, of course, a sin.
And I also think that you made a good point because there's this problem between the phrase Black Lives Matter and the organization Black Lives Matter
Yeah.
because Black lives do matter, obviously, but supporting the organization is a whole other level of immorality and injustice, really. Um, so let's get back to the topic. And can Christians be pro-choice? I think I agree with Rafi where he says that a new Christian who is just learning the ropes of Christianity and is starting as a baby to learn what morality is okay with God and what's the morality that God has established as opposed to the morality that the world thinks they think is right. Um, so I do agree with that. I actually had not thought of that, to be quite honest. I had just straight up said no, no, they can't, and I didn't think about that like little exception there that could happen. So I totally agree with that. I do think that Christians who are new in the faith could probably be on the wrong side of that because they're new and they're babies and they don't know. Kind of like babies in real life, right? They start to walk, but they don't walk quite right because they're still learning to walk. So in the same sense, a new baby Christian are starting to walk in the Christian faith, but they don't always walk quite right because they're still babies. So I think that we can make that safe distinction there. However, that being said, what do you guys think about mature or Christians who say to be mature and have been in church for a long time, and they are saying that they're pro-choice? What do you guys think
No,
about
They're not much Christians.
I can see why a lot of people want to be pro-choice. And then it's because it's weird. Like, you know, this is a conversation that comes up a lot. And I see the emotional aspect of it. Like, a lot of people try to use the defense of, what about rape victims? What about this and that? First of all, two evils don't make a right. So it doesn't, you know, it doesn't mean that just because something evil happened to you, you have to do something evil. But at the end of the day, I understand why. But as a Christian, it doesn't, no emotional aspect or anything like that is over God's law. So it doesn't matter how you feel about it. It's still wrong.
And also, one point that I've heard Ben Shapiro make, which I think is very interesting, is that he says, okay, let's suppose that we give in to allowing you to have abortions for just the rape victims, which is less than like 1%, or something like that. And so Ben Shapiro makes the point, and he's like, okay, so let's pretend that I do give in, and I say, okay, fine, rape victims can have abortions. Would you then be pro-life? And then people still say no, because that's not really what they want. They want all women, regardless of the situation, even if it was an irresponsible decision where they shouldn't have had sexual relations with someone and ended up getting pregnant. People just want that to be like a birth control option. You know, where you can get rid of, you can avoid having a baby, but in this sense, the baby already exists, as opposed to other birth control, which stop you from even making that baby in the first place. So can Christians be pro-choice? And I think someone in the chat answered saying no. I agree. You know, if you think of this life, just because it's in the womb, somehow it's okay to kill that life. There's a problem, because a Christian who says they're pro-choice and they're okay with the baby being killed, murdered, dismembered, tortured, someone who is okay with that, then they would have to be okay with people killing people, because it's essentially the same thing. And a Christian who is okay with murder and thinks that it's totally okay to kill someone a premeditated murder, then there is a very huge moral problem there that we need to really address, because we can't call ourselves Christians when we're going to plain out deny some very obvious morals described in the Bible. So your short answer is going to be no. Your exceptions are going to be those baby Christians who just became Christians and who probably don't know any better. So they're probably going to have to learn eventually. But they have to get out of that if they're going to try to say that they're Christians. They're going to have to change that ideology eventually, hopefully. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to say that they can be a Christian and be pro-choice at the same time.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to add anything to that?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just pure convenience. That's literally why this pro-choice is such a big thing, because especially the loudest people are usually people in my generation or parents of those who have already gone through the situation of my generation. So like the parents are the ones where they wanted their kids to be something and they had an abortion. They're like, no, you know, my kid could have been something, so that kid was going to get in the way. Well, then you should have practiced abstinence. Like,
right.
Like, be smart about it. The problem is that this is just a convenience. So people pay whatever the price for convenience. And unfortunately, it's at the cost of kids. And I always compare it to like dogs. Like, you know, dogs are owned, yet you will go to jail if you kill a dog.
Right.
Like, that is actually a property you have. So it's my dog. I get to kill it. But the law says, no, you can't. It's not your choice. Like, okay, then let me be pro-choice for dog killing. I mean, like, that's the kind of thing where it's illogical, because obviously dog is worth much less than humans.
Right.
And then at the end of the day, we also doing the same thing. Like we are constantly seeing commercials of like kids in other countries, like, oh, they're suffering, blah, blah. But we put those kids, you know, obviously as somebody who is in need, but then the kids that are still in the womb are not essentially important.
And I think that a lot of people say that just because your life is going to become more difficult, there's somehow not going to be any kind of joy behind parenthood, or any kind of satisfaction between or not, there's not going to be any kind of satisfaction where you get to enjoy that child just because it's going to be difficult, you know. And I guess I can ask you, Rafi, and maybe you don't want to answer this question, and it's okay if you don't want to, but in your difficult situation, do you regret having your child? Do you regret, your child being born? I mean,
No, I mean, there's like it is it not maybe the question itself is maybe not phrased as I would like. You know, I don't regret having my son. I do regret not doing it right.
yeah.
But that doesn't mean I would not take responsibility for what I did. I mean, yeah, life is 20 times more difficult with a kid, and you have to think of example and always another life you have to take care of. But it's still able to be done. You can still be successful. You can still do the things you need to do. You just get a lot less sleep, and you care a lot more for other things. But it doesn't matter. You can still do it.
But I think it also teaches you selflessness,
Oh
especially
yeah.
for those of us who are very selfish. It teaches you a lot of selflessness. It teaches you like to be responsible. Now, of course, we're not saying go out and do the same thing, right? We're not saying don't do that. Don't do it. Be obedient to God. Practice abstinence. Be a good follower of Christ. But if you end up making that mistake, you're gonna own up to it. You gotta own up to it. You can't just solve it by getting rid of a child. This is a baby's life we're talking about. And I think that for me, I waited 10 years to have children. And even now, I can't imagine my life without my kids. Like, I remember it, but then I'm like, would I rather have that than have my two children? No, absolutely not. I would still have my kids all over again. Um, and I'm not that overly emotional person. I'm not this person who overly allows emotion to take over. So that's a lot coming from me where I would still want to have my kids over again. Whether the next time would be 10 years or 5 years or 3 years, I'd still do it all over again. So, but what's on the line here is a child's life, and your mistakes or someone else's mistakes or um, the horrible situations of life do not get to dictate if that child gets to live or not. And as a Christian, we should defend the innocent lives. We should defend innocent lives, not put them up for murder.
Now, one thing I'm just gonna add because something I thought about a lot is the church itself is the one that is constantly saying, you know, pro-life, pro-life, pro-life. But in the sense of what the church is supposed to be doing, we're actually supposed to be helping out with these situations.
Mm-hmm.
So if the kids are unwanted and are still being born, it should be on the local church or the local community to help out those mothers who don't want those kids. So I think the church is also lacking on their responsibility to do much of this work. Instead, the government is doing much of this work. But back in old times, the church was the one who would take care of it. I know there were situations where they were bad, but they were the ones that were supposed to take on these issues, these sense of, if you want people to do the right thing, you have to do the right thing as well, or at least help do the right things. So I think the church is lacking quite a bit. And I only figured this out because there was a guy who was pro-choice who made that argument. I was like, yeah, I mean, we're over here preaching pro-life, but we're not actually helping in doing anything. And that's also an issue. I think we're, as Christians, not doing our entire part. We're just on the end of saying, no, don't kill them.
Yeah, that's a good point. However, I do want to clarify that I think that a lot of that is lacking mostly in the Hispanic church. Because I was looking at some statistics of how much the church gives for these kinds of situations, and in general, the American church gives a lot of money to help out these situations, to help out single moms and all that. I think where we're lacking is in the Hispanic community. We lack that a lot, and to be more real with you, our church is lacking in that. Now, thankfully, that's because there's not a lot of girls in our church who do that. But I think that it doesn't matter if it's people from our church or not, that we're supposed to be actively helping those who need it in that sense. But there's this fine line between, yes, the church has to help, and the American church is helping, and then there's those who take advantage of it. And
Yeah. Well, that's every line and everything.
Yeah, and I want to live off of other people. So I think that all of us need to agree, including the listeners, that yes, help is something you could receive, but that ultimately it's your responsibility to take care of that child.
Yeah. And I mean, we don't really preach or teach about it as like a whole church.
Yeah.
It's something my wife was telling, but as I think, as we also touched about homosexuality last time, a lot of times we don't really completely attack these current situations. We're kind of in our own little bubble, and because it's not happening within our church as much, I would say. We're kind of like, that situation shouldn't matter right now because it's not one of our big problems in the church, like you said. So I think if we brought focus to it, we may actually maybe even help a little bit more.
And I want to be real, and I want to say that what's not happening probably is the pregnancy part of it, because probably other stuff is happening.
Yeah.
Like they're probably having sex when they're not supposed to, but they're just not getting girls pregnant. Both matter as much. Okay, let's move on to the next topic. That's enough of that part of it. Let's move on to the next one. The next topic is, does it matter if I use profanity? What do you guys think?
I guess with this one, our conduct is very important, because when you go out the street, you can't really tell who's Christian or not. It's just the way you act around people. So if somebody's cursing out a storm and later on they tell me they're Christian, I'm like, really? Because I had a boss like that, and he cursed a lot, and later on, throughout knowing him, he said he was a deacon, and I was like, really? A deacon? And I'm like, okay. Because, like I said, the way we act have to show a Christian value, So, if we let that happen, they start cursing in front of the pulpit and preaching and stuff like that. So the way you act is very important, and we should act Christian,
And also, God has this, like, there's the world standard, right, of conduct, and then there's God's standard of conduct for Christians. And we should live up, we're going to fail. We're not going to 100%, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, be able to live up to those standards, but we should at least try as hard as we can. I do understand that there are people who grew up in dysfunctional homes where profanity was just like part of the language. And then they come to Christ and they're trying to change that, and it's going to be a process. I understand those kinds of things.
Yeah.
What I have a problem with is when Christians make it part of their lifestyle, and then it's like normal to use profanity for a Christian. And we have to remember that God calls us to a different standard that the world is called to. That's why he says, don't just love those who love you, because everyone can do that. He's like, that's easy. Even non-Christians can love the people that love them back. And he says, but I want you to love those who don't love you. I want you to love your enemy, right? There's this other higher standard God wants us to live up to. And so I think that can apply to every part of our lives. What does the world expect? And how can I go an extra mile to present a better character, a better person to the world, so that my testimony can reflect what Christ would want my testimony to reflect? And I highly, highly doubt that using profanity is going to do that. But I think that we shouldn't just limit it to profanity. I think there's a lot of other things besides profanity that can really mess up our light to the world.
What was the question? Did it say should, or
does it matter if I use profanity?
Oh, okay. Well, yes, it does matter. I mean, we're supposed to be the pillars of standards. I mean, definitely the imagery has a lot to do with it. But one of the things that I definitely see as an issue is that there's a lot of Christians who don't believe that image has a big impact, because a lot of people are like, well, it shouldn't, a lot of people preach that you shouldn't matter what other people think, blah, 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 blah. but that's not what the Bible teaches us. I mean, there's a balance to everything, but your imagery has a lot to do with how much you have influence on. So if you have a good image, of course, you can influence more. And if you're a good standard, then people pick up on that. And you do have to protect your image as a Christian. And it will annoy some people because they're like, oh, this guy thinks or this girl thinks that he's a goody-goody or that he's a high standard moral. Not that you should aim at annoying people, but it shouldn't bother you that they think bad of you because you're protecting your image or trying to live a good lifestyle. Because it is. I mean, profanity is associated also with a bad type of culture. So with profanity, you start associating it with violence and blah, blah, blah. So of course, and it's plus an anger kind of thing, like you associate it with anger. So of course, when you're angry, you're not supposed to be sinning, from what the Bible tells us. So cursing may be a sin because it's something that you're offending other people. And the Bible clearly states that if something is bothering your brother or sister, you are supposed to refrain from using that. And it doesn't stop at just profanity. It talks about further than that. But still, you shouldn't be doing that. So yeah, I mean, the short answer is no. Yes, it does matter if you use profanity as a Christian.
And like I really like that point you make. This is especially true if you're talking to another person and you're purposely using profanity to hurt them, to offend them. That's especially wrong. Jose just said, like, what if you, smash your pinky and then you're like, want to cuss? Well, in that sense, you're not actually treating another person with profanity. Obviously, it would be better if you don't, because then, that becomes part of your vocabulary when you're angry. You don't want that stuff to come out when you're angry. Yeah. But there's a big difference between saying a cuss word when you smash your pinky, right? Or when, or if you're talking to another person and you're purposely trying to offend them and use profanity to offend them. There's a huge difference. So that's very important to also remember. And also, Paul does talk about how we're supposed to live a certain standard to the world so that if they ever accuse us of anything, Paul says, that way, if they ever try to talk about you, if they ever try to accuse you of something, they have nothing on you. That's what Paul said.
Yeah.
So I wonder how many of us can say, like, oh, you got nothing on me. That's pretty high standard to live up to. But it's good for us. If you think about it, it's good for the person who's trying to live up to that standard because it makes you a better person and it gives you better character, a stronger character, a more responsible, more reliable person. And you will find out how your coworkers realize, wait, no, you're different from all the other people who say they're Christians.
Yeah.
You're not the same as all these other quote unquote Christians. You're different. And so people will realize.
My wife brought up a comment. She's next to me. She doesn't want to talk, but she gives me notes.
Hey, you're one, so you can talk to her.
She usually has good notes. So she does say, what about profanity you think in your head? And that led me to think, well, I mean, you as a Christian, you know that the only person that listens to you by yourself is God. So would you stand in front of God and cuss at him or cuss in front of him? And in that case, I'll be like, no, I'll be way too scared. Well, exactly. So if you wouldn't do it to somebody who you see as like you admire, you don't cuss at them because you admire them or you think of them or you respect them. So it's the same thing. I mean, God is all over the place. So if you are there cussing, I mean, he hears you. So if you would do it, it's really simple. If you can do it in front of God, then that's okay. If you wouldn't, then just don't.
Yeah. And that's where I think comes in the fact that we mentally sin, right, as well. Like, even if you don't act on a sin, you can still mentally sin. Like the Bible says, you can desire a woman and then you've sinned. That's it. You're done. You sinned already, Just don't act on it because you don't want to make the situation worse, So in the same sense, I think, if you mentally cuss someone out and use profanity, you should ask for forgiveness. Don't act on it. Don't actually say it. Because you don't want to make the situation worse, but it's still counted as sin, and we still have to ask for forgiveness for those thoughts that we have. Yeah. But that was a really good point because I didn't think about it. So anybody want to add anything before we move on to the last topic?
So when you look at, let's say, comedians, sometimes some of them feel like they have to use profanity to be funnier. but there's comedians who doesn't use profanity and has a very good, stable career.
Yeah.
You know?
And the thing is that you have to understand that what the world likes is worldly things.
Yeah.
So, like, a Christian comedian is never going to be as famous as a secular comedian because that's not what the
Yeah.
world wants. So, any Christian who is trying to find any kind of spot in the comedian light, like, I know, what's her name? Jennifer, the nails girl. No, Angela Johnson. Her name is Angela Johnson. Angela Johnson, she doesn't use profanity in her comedy, and she's not a Christian. She grew up in like a Christian home, but she's not a Christian. But she's super funny, but she's
Yeah.
not ever gonna be as famous as, like, you know, what's his name? I forgot his name.
Kevin Hart.
Yes, Kevin Hart. You know, who uses a cuss word after
Yeah.
every like 3 words or something like
Yeah.
that. It's ridiculous. Because that's not what the world wants. So Steven, if you're mad and you say a cuss word, it's still wrong. You should not do it. Okay. So it's very important that you realize that your vocabulary says something about you. But I will say that is not going to be as evil as when you speak to someone and are mistreating someone, but they're both bad. They're both sin. They're both not good for you. Okay, so it's just not a good thing to practice. It's just not a good thing to practice. So let's move on to the third topic. And the last topic is, what's the science behind being pro-life? Okay, so what is basically the scientific evidence of why we have chosen to be pro-lifers? So remember, guys, we can't say we're pro-life just because we're Christian. It's a legitimate reason, okay? But you need to be able to give more reasons than that. And so, okay, well, I know other Christians who are pro-choice. So how come you're saying that you're pro-life, right? So we need to find that science behind pro-life. We need to find those scientific reasons of why is it that we defend pro-life. I mean, I don't know if you guys follow Live Action. I do. I like to follow a lot of people who advocate for preborn babies. And Live Action on Instagram has posted that Google has banned all of their ads for the Olivia campaign that they created. And if you guys are not familiar with that, the Olivia campaign is basically videos that Live Action created so that people can see how developed a baby is from the time they're conceived. And so people are able to see how this baby develops. And Google has banned all those videos, has banned all the ads to reverse abortion pills. So they're basically saying, you know, we're pro-choice and we're going to ban anything that's pro-life. And in these videos, they have shown this video to several people who are okay with abortion up until 15 weeks. And this video has changed their mind because they have been able to see how a baby is so developed by the time they're 15 weeks. So one of the things I want to share is that I know that doctors say that they can detect a heartbeat as early as 3 weeks. That's really early in pregnancy. Okay, that's already a lot of science for you. Because if you can detect a heartbeat, that's a life that's alive. I mean, hello, whenever people are checking for CPR, they do 2 things. They check for breathing and they check for your heartbeat. Those 2 things. Why? Because those 2 things indicate life. Okay? So for a baby who has already a heartbeat at 3 weeks, that should tell you this baby is alive. So why is it okay at any point after 3 weeks to get rid of that life, to murder that life? Okay? So I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you have any facts on science about pro-life or babies, like their development, the science behind their development, or any opinions on it?
Well, from day of conception, they are potential life,
Yeah.
and that is even past, I think, in the value of someone who's brain dead, and yet we are constantly waiting, and like the choice is to keep those people that are completely brain dead alive, and yet we are okay with potential life being killed. In that sense, if we're talking about, if you, a lot of people use the fact that they specifically use the word parasite, like someone who is necessity of the mom to stay alive, or a being that is a necessity of another body to stay alive. But in that case, there are many people that are 100% reliable on machinery or anything, what is it? The pulse
Oxygen?
on your heart, or whatever it's called. But there's a lot of people who have a lot of issues, and they are 100% reliable on machinery to stay alive. Then are you okay with killing them just because they're not able to do it themselves? Like, the potential of life is already there, and yet at a certain age, I think like 6 months, they're able to be alive by themselves. So that's not a great defense. Apart from that, I mean, just the fact that in a moral standpoint, even though the world is not Christian, but we have that sense of morale where we defend children. It is adapted into our instinct because they are the next generation that allows humanity to survive. So for us to be okay with killing the ones that are in the stomach is kind of contrary of what we would normally think is okay, even as a society who's not everybody's Christian, but we have that moral that's already instinctual. So we're not protecting we're constantly looking at how to protect humanity, yet we're killing the offspring that's supposed to be the next generation of humanity, which makes no sense. Because we make such a big emphasis on protecting the young. I mean, if a boat is going down, who do you get out first? Women and children. Mm-hmm. All the time, it's women and children. And then, so what's the point of killing children that are absolutely innocent just because you think that it's a choice, because you, quote unquote, think it's a parasite?
It's inconvenient.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, babies dream. Like I read about how babies actually dream in the womb. They're able to feel pain. Can you imagine? I cannot even imagine how a baby who's already feeling pain, what it must go through in those abortions where they're dismembered and basically cut into pieces. There's a doctor, a very famous doctor. I can't remember his name right now, but he's a famous doctor who used to perform abortions and now defends life, and he's pro-life now, and he has videos that show how they do all this. I mean, it's pretty disgusting how they show what happens to that child when they do this. And it's scary because he talks about how at the end they have to count all the body parts to make sure that he got the 2 arms, the 2 legs, the torso, and the head out of the womb. I mean, how graphic is that? And my thing is, how are doctors okay with doing this? I don't understand. Like, how is it that they have been okay with doing this? It just doesn't make any sense to me. It's pretty sick.
And they can't claim ignorance. They're doctors. I mean, it's like... Yeah. It's like the people that were Nazis were like, "Oh, I didn't know." I mean, you understand evil when you're doing it. So come on.
Orders.
There's a reason why they were still persecuted.
Right.
No, I mean the science behind it. I don't know the scientific of it. Most of the time, when I defend it, is the moral aspect of it. But scientifically, just in general, I mean, it's a living creature. As a humanity, we are constantly trying to protect living creatures, and that's it. I mean, it really shouldn't go past that, but for some reason it has to.
Yeah.
I mean, inconvenience, none of that, it has anything to do with us. I mean, how much inconvenience is it when we save many other lives? How inconvenience was it to be in the Middle East saving people's lives? I mean, it doesn't matter of inconvenience. And it just, the pro-choice movement is just a selfish movement. All it wants is people to be able to choose to do evil. Which, again, if it was that percentage of people that maybe were raped or have a health issue, this would be a different conversation, whether it still be evil, but those people would be able to choose to do evil.
Yeah.
And there's definitely like a gray area because you're talking about 2 different, especially if the mom's health is at risk, you're talking about 2 potential lives at risk. That's a different story. You should have a conversation about that because it's a big decision. But when you're making a decision just because it's inconvenient and you forgot to use protection or you forgot to do birth control, that's extremely selfish. It's just about your own life.
And I wanted to make this point because what I find a lot in our generations as Christians is that we are okay with people getting married, even if they had sex, as long as they didn't get her pregnant. And there's an issue with that because as Christians, that should not be a thing. And we somehow make it's like the fact that he gets her pregnant, that somehow that's so much worse. Now, I want to clarify. It is more difficult in the sense that their life's going to be more difficult with that child. But the sexual sin behind it, it's still fornication. It's still the same thing. It's just that now there's evidence of it as opposed to the people who are living in sin and there's no evidence of it. That's the only difference, but it's still not good. And the only solution, and even secular people will tell you this because it's scientifically true, the only solution to not getting someone pregnant, the only 100% way to not get someone pregnant is practicing abstinence. Okay, that's the only way. Any other way, there is a chance that it will happen regardless of what you use. And we as women, I think, really need to put things into perspective for ourselves because you're the one who's going to carry the baby. You're the one who could get the diseases mostly. It mostly affects women. I mean, some affect men too, but most of those affect women. So really, it's really to our convenience not to use abortion as a birth control strategy, but to close our legs in a vulgar way, and practice abstinence so that we can, first of all, beyond anything, glorify God with the way we're living our life. And second of all, avoid all the consequences that can happen with not doing things the way God established things should be. So the whole science behind pro-life, there's just too much to mention, I think. You have the heartbeat at 3 weeks. You have the child already literally having the little arms, the little feet, as early as I think it's 8 weeks or 10 weeks. I can't remember, but it's somewhere in between there. And these babies can dream. These babies they have their own DNA and they have a heartbeat. So I don't understand how it is that we can somehow scientifically prove they're not in human life when they have all the qualities of a human life that we would defend outside the womb. Like you said, Rafi, a person who's in a vegetative state, who can't breathe on their own, who are not awake, pretty much in a state of a baby in the womb, right? But just outside of the womb, we still keep them alive. We still try to see how can we help this person stay alive. And the only reason people opt to not keep them alive is because they can't survive on their own. But this child isn't even given the chance to prove that they can because they're basically killed before they even have the chance to do that.
Well, the thing is that the value of the baby isn't considered by the size of it.
Exactly.
Plus the aspect of one of the defenses that are self-awareness, but it doesn't matter. A kid comes out of the womb, they're still not self-aware. They're just piles of meat. That's what I call them because they really are. My son was just there. I mean, it's not like they're not giving part into society. They're not doing anything important, but they're still
and they throw up.
Yeah, all they're doing is they're beings though. So the value of it is still there. I mean, it's a human form, just extremely small. They do not have self-awareness, but they are still potential life.
And they're really, and to be truthful, to describe what you're saying, they're not useful either to society.
Yeah.
Like babies are not useful to society because they're there, they sleep, they poop, they eat, and they cry. And that's it. Like they're not useful to society. They don't add anything to society until they get older and they become useful in society, good citizens, get a job, etc. But at that point, they can't really do anything on their own. They can't do anything at all, really. So they're not useful. But that's the thing. Human value is not based on how useful someone is. Human value is not based on their size. It's not based on their IQ. It's not based on any of that. And then secular people have to try to explain, so where does human life value come from? And that's how we Christians have the best explanation, which is that we have the image of God. And because we have the image of God, all human life has value, whether you have Down syndrome, whether you have autism, whether you have a mental retardation condition, whether you have mental health issues, whether you're a bum on the street who has no money, or you're, one of the richest people in the world. It doesn't matter, because those are not the things that give us value as human beings. What gives us value as human beings is the image that God placed in each and one of us, which is why we have to fight for the human life, because it has value.
Yeah.
And that's the best explanation for human value, because secular people who don't believe in God, they don't know how to justify human value, because we all in our hearts have that programmed where we know that human life has value. But people who are atheists can't explain why, because they don't believe in God. So they have to come up with other strategies to try to explain it, but they can't come up with a good explanation for it.
Yeah. We have 1 minute left. I just want to do something because Ezekiel put a comment here. I just want to check it real quick. It says, "Wait a minute. If being born is the greatest act of creation of all, then what are you supposed to do after that?" That's what the world thinks. The greatest act of creation is not being born. That's not a miracle. That's not anything special. Everyone can do it. Being born was actually to praise God or to reflect God on earth. That's your actual purpose as a Christian, not just having a
Yeah,
kid.
that's a good point. I don't see it on my end, but a human's purpose is not to be born.
Yeah.
Like, that's not their purpose on life, to be born. It goes all back to having to live. Our purpose is to live for God, bring Him glory. Um, so, and that's another point. Like, we like to use the word miracle and throw it around a lot, and the word miracle has lost its meaning, because of that. And while people would like to say, "Oh, babies are a little miracle," um, if you describe a miracle as a supernatural event that doesn't happen very often, that would not describe a baby. So we just throw it around to try to describe the beautiful thing that there is behind creation, but it's not a miracle. Miracles, from a Christian definition, it's something supernatural that is not an everyday event that happens. Um, and having a baby is very natural. It's a very natural thing where the egg and the sperm come together and form a baby, and that's just a natural thing that happens. There's something supernatural about it. Um, of
I think
course,
we
as
got like a
women,
1 minute left.
no, I already fixed it.
Oh, okay, okay. I thought it was going to cut off. That's what I
No.
was checking. Okay.
There are women who have difficulty having babies, and they've been told they can never get pregnant. And in those times, you can maybe make the argument that for that exception, for that situation, God intervened. But it would be very difficult to try to say that all babies are miracles, because that's not the definition of a miracle. So that's very important, because we overuse that word a lot, and it's lost its meaning. So now people just, they don't even believe miracles can happen. So, anything else we'd like to add? Kids, you guys have any questions about the subjects that we talked about that you would like to ask before we gotta go? We do have to wait a few seconds, because they don't hear us until like 30 seconds after.
I just have a question. I don't know much about the science of pro-life too. I'm learning like everybody else. But my thing, maybe I watch too much movies. So every time I see a movie when a woman does decided to take an abortion, they come out of the hospital looking terrible, like they just finished throwing up or something like that. So why women are fighting for something that you're gonna come out of the hospital every single time looking that
Honestly,
uncomfortable?
I think it's because they're being lied to. Planned Parenthood is saying that it's an easy process, it's cool, you're good, you're gonna be fine, it's not a problem. But the science behind that is really that there's a lot of infections involved with that. Women are not always, and it's not just the physical toll it takes.
Yeah.
There is a huge mental toll that is taken when women have abortions. I mean, you're gonna hear a lot of stories of women who regret. Most women regret it. Um, and it's I mean, think about it. When you realize you've murdered a baby, you gotta live with that.
Yeah.
That's tough.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, go through that every month, and you're fighting for that. That's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah. And the thing
Well, I
is,
mean,
go ahead, John.
there's also the it's one of those things like, when you cross a certain line, it impacts you as a human. Even though you may not be a Christian, you have a moral standard, you have a moral instinct. And when you're killing something, even though you try to justify it as much as you can or convince yourself that you're doing it out of, I don't know, just giving the baby a better life or a better death because you weren't going to like it, something like that. They try to convince themselves. I mean, a lot of women, even though they're going through with it, they know 100%, or you have that guilt inside of you, which is instinctual as a human. And of course, when you're done doing that, it's like when you're done killing somebody, like you're in shock. You're in this place of, wow, I really just did that. So it's emotional, it's physical, plus it's that, I wouldn't even know how to explain it, but that moral, like, hurt, destruction that you have on yourself because you just did something that's terrible.
Yeah.
And Planned Parenthood is doing a very good job of presenting abortion as an easy process, is like no biggie. And you got to remember, Planned Parenthood is a business. They're making money, millions out of this, out of killing babies. They're really making a lot of money. And Planned Parenthood has gone as far as now as like to give condoms to 10-year-olds because they're encouraging children to start being sexually active at a very early age because they're gonna make money out of it. So those of you listening, don't fall into these traps, guys. There's nothing that's going to come out that is good, not spiritually and not physically, about making dumb decisions like this. Anybody can go out and make the decision to sleep with someone. You're going to make a difference if you're that one person who doesn't. Okay? You're not special for going to sleep with someone. You're not cool for doing that. What makes you different, what makes you special, when you're that one person who hasn't not done it and everybody else has. So there's really no good reasons to go out there and make horrible decisions like this. I mean, I guess you can say good reason, but in comparison to what? Everything else that's going to come after that is going to be a disaster if you make those decisions based on whatever may seem to be a good reason, because you're really not. So
And honestly, as a lot of these guys are teens, enjoy being a teen, man. Don't try to grow up so fast. These are situations that adults are supposed to be going through, like marriage and that part of everything, the sexual activity, as a married couple. That's things you're supposed to worry about when you're married. I mean, enjoy being a teen and, do more of like your self-analysis, understand yourself, what you're supposed to accomplish, what you're supposed to change about yourself. Don't just like jump into like, oh, I need a relationship, I need that, blah, blah, blah. I mean, yes, it's important in the future of your life, but it's not essential. It's not the only thing that's important.
That's going to give you value or complete you or make you better. Like, if you can't feel completed with Jesus Christ, nobody's going to make you feel complete. If you can't feel satisfied, if you can't be satisfied with Jesus Christ, there's nobody who's going to be able to do that for you. And you have to understand that living for Christ doesn't mean you're going to find someone to marry. It doesn't mean that he gets to pick someone out for you. That's your responsibility. And if you're not in a good mental state, you're not going to choose well. You're just not going to do wisely. So don't put yourself in that position. All right. I really like DIY Sisters. I don't know who that is, but they said for the cussing question, read Colossians 3:8. But now ye also put off all these: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth. I absolutely love that. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, absolutely. God just has us to a whole different standard. Anything else before we go? Are we good to go? All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye. Bye, everyone.